Those of you who are new, I tend to just talk a lot, so excuse me for that. But I believe this is a great church. Not because of us, but because God has chosen to bless us. And you are the ones who make it great. He works through people. And as much as I, love to hear Don thank all of you, my heart is that we would just ask God regularly to help us cherish the very things that a man who has suffered greatly, who continues to have to wrestle with Parkinson's and losing a voice and all the stuff that goes with this, and yet to find joy and find the ability to be able to say, Lord, bless you, this is a great place. I hope you own that. I hope you embrace it. I hope you reach out and hug it, You're going to hear a lot in the weeks to come, especially this next month, as our sermon series has a lot to do with the idea of gathering and engaging and reaching. Those three words are the things that we're going to be dealing with in choir and in the church at large. And I want you to recognize that those aren't words that we just want you to tack onto your Christian life. Because they're not just functions, they're really identity markers. If you follow Christ, then Christ is trying to recreate himself in you, as only he can do in you, because you are unique to him. But he lives out his life in you. And so the Spirit of God is really trying to take control of your life. And part of our struggle in life is surrendering. Right? Surrendering to the work of the Spirit and doing that work in us. So his desires would become our desires. So that his actions would become our actions. His thoughts, our thoughts. And the question is, are we fighting it or are we going along with it? Do we wrestle with it or do we just say, God, I give myself to you every single day as soon as my feet hit the floor. Right? I think it's safe to say that Jesus' own example was one of gathered kind of approach to life. He gathered with his disciples regularly. He went to the temple and he preached in the temple. And I don't think that's the only thing he did in that temple, because there was worship going on in that temple. And I believe he prayed, and I believe he praised, and I believe he did all those things with the people that he gathered with. It was good for me to think about coming tonight. I've been doing this for, forget the 15 years teaching, but for about 28 years I've been, every week leading a choir. And beloved, I still love it. I look forward to it. And that's a good sign, to tell you the truth. Not just because I love it, but because I believe that's what God wants me to keep doing. A church can become, however, somewhat myopic when you have a group like this, because the choir becomes your church, or your ABF can become your church, or your grace group, or the ministry thing that you're a part of can become your church. And that's never the idea. And then you put on top of that some of the issues that you might have at home. If you have a spouse at home that isn't necessarily driven toward being a part of church, or you have kids or whatever. I can remember when the question around our house was, hey, do we have to go to church this week? And Robin would say, hey, look, you're one of the pastors. But here's the deal. I truly believe the mindset that you come to church with, not just come to choir with, don't hear me wrong here, that you come to church with determines the impact of your experience much more so than anything the preacher's going to do, or a musician's going to do, or a friend's going to do. Your mindset, what have you come to do? If you've come to church to get something out of it, if you've come to church because it's your turn to serve, and that's the only reason, and when you're done with church, you're missing out. If you come to church with the idea that you're there to participate, you're there to encourage, you're there, as Hebrews says, to stir up people, to love, and to good works. If that's your mindset, then you come with a whole different set of expectations. And my hope would be that, sure, you come when the choir's in, but my hope would be that this is just a piece of this huge thing that we call the church here at Grace Baptist. And we have a big church. There's no doubt about that. But here's the deal. If you believe your salvation has everything to do with what God saved you from, rather than what God saved you into, you're missing out. Because the whole idea of what God has done is He has created a people. He has created a church. He's created a body. He's created a oneness, a people for His own possession, this holy nation, if you will. And the problem, I think, one of the problems the church faces is that when we care so much about making sure people get saved, is that we stop at the point that somebody says, okay, I want to follow Jesus. But if we're not saying to them, we want you to come and be saved into this group of people. We want you to be a part of this body. We want you to see that you are a member of us. We need you, you need us. It's that kind of approach that makes the difference between whether a church is a bunch of people who are saved or a bunch of people who see that they are connected to one another. That God had a purpose in saving you, and it wasn't just to keep you out of hell. So with that in mind, and we talk about this a lot, we've got to examine our hearts. We've got to say, where is my heart? What is it when the choir's not in that drives me to church? Or do I even come? Or do I think about it? Is there something more important? Am I too tired? Whatever the case may be. There are people in this choir who will come, who are hard-pressed, who work hard, who are anxious, who are fearful, who are waiting for a job offer. I mean, you can name it all over the place. And you can bet that that is magnified a number of times when you look out into that congregation. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. But just as some of you experience, you come here and you go, oh, I told Peter I'd come. I really don't want to be there, but I'm going to come. And then all of a sudden you experience what God wanted to do all the time, which is give your heart some rest. Give your heart some peace. Isn't that what Jesus promised? Come to me and I will give you rest. Okay? And you go home and all of a sudden things don't look quite as bad. That's God working. That's not, and it's working through this group, right? It has nothing to do in that moment with you being saved. It has everything with you being a part of something. That's the church. That's the power of the church. That's what I want this choir to be able to communicate and live out so these people can see that. You know, I asked for a 90% attendance, okay? And that's a big commitment. There's no doubt about it. And I know that there are people who have not chosen to continue this year because they take that seriously and they know they can't do that. But I really believe that if you believe that there is more to coming than learning how to sing, there's more to coming than even ministering to this body, but when you stand up as a group, as a part of the body, you say, I am a part of Christ. I am a member of Him. And this body does not function as completely without me. And I don't function as completely without you. When we get to that point, things start to finally find a center point. And I think we finally kind of feel this sense that God has put into us. Because I think the main thing is, and I know I'm going on and on here, forgive me, but I was excited to be with you tonight. And here's why. Because there was a sense that as I read in Acts 2, the whole idea of they were devoted to the apostles' teaching and to breaking bread and communion and that kind of stuff, right? I always read that verse and I think about, okay, what is the apostles' teaching and what is that and all that kind of stuff. But the word I've always tend to just skip right over is the word devoted. Because devoted is more than I have to. Devoted is a longing. It's a passion of heart that says, I want to be there. You can belong to Costco. You can belong to some service organization. You can belong to a wine club. Oh, forget it. You can belong to a lot of things. But there's a difference between belonging to and longing to be. And that's something I want you to take before the Lord and say, do I long to be, not just a part of this choir, do I long to be a part of this church? Do I long to be the person you need for this church? Because that has everything to do with how I grow, and it has everything to do with what my mindset is when I show up. Am I coming here because I need it? Now, hear me. There are days when I come to church and I go, oh Lord, I really need this. And I'm sitting there and sorry, I just don't feel like I have much to offer. Right? That's a reality to our life. But what I never want to think of is even in my weakness that God might not use that in somebody else's life. That person's here and he's barely alive. That person's here and they're struggling. But they're here, right? That person's here, but they lost their mom this week. Right, Cecilia? That's a reality that even though she may come and say, I need this tonight, we see that and we say, Cecilia sees that she needs to be a part of this group. And that makes this group that much more special to you, right? Because people invest in that. God puts that longing in our hearts. When we see that He loves it when we want to be with Him. And to me that is such a critical part of who we are as a church. That's why He uses the term Emmanuel, right? God with us. I read in Luke 13, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets, stones those who are sent. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings? Feel that for a minute. That's the heart of God. That's the heart of God for every one of you. And He delights in the fact that you show up, not just to choir, but to church. Because that's what He longs to do. And even in our fallenness, we long. Creation, right? Creation longs. In Romans 8, creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of men. Psalm 119 says, I long for your salvation, O Lord, and your law is my delight. 2 Corinthians, Paul writes, in this tent we groan, longing to put on a heavenly dwelling. You said, this is just a part of who God is. God longs to be with us, and one day we will be. One day that longing will be gone because we'll see Him face to face. And I love that. But we need to embrace this idea that that's part of what we're going to experience right now. The question is, and this was another part of the Psalm 38:9 that struck me. O Lord, all my longing is before you. My sighing is not hidden from you. All right? If God knows your longing, here's the question. As He listens to the longings of your heart, what does He hear? Does He hear a longing for Him? A longing for His people? A longing that you would find yourself to be there and be a part of? Because that's what I hope in part we do when we come together, but more importantly, that's what I want to encourage you as a people who belong and who long to be a part of what God is doing here at Grace. And that's why David even prayed, create in me this clean heart, God. Renew a right spirit, steadfast spirit within me. Restore the joy of salvation. And I believe that has everything to do with the communion that we forge together. Uphold me with this willing spirit. And the whole reason for all of that David prayed that is not, then I'll be a happy camper. You know what the next verse is? Then I will teach transgressors your way. You see, immediately, all that we do when we realize that God is with us and that we are with Him, everything turns outward. And we can teach other people. And we can reach other people. That's a big thing. Now, we're going to be camping on this idea, because I need to stop talking. We're going to be camping on this idea for a few weeks, because I think really the church needs to be revived in the sense of gathering. And part of that is I think the church needs to be revived in the sense that we're saved into something. We're not just saved. Because that's when the church scatters into a million different denominations and a million different directions. And it's time for us to live something out that's going to be a little bit different that way. Amen?
Amen.